Greetings, Earthlings and other people in the universe. You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where we take a
Cheers to
deep
the
dive.
queers.
Cheers to the queers, woo! Where we take a deep dive into a horror film, and this one actually is kind of a horror film, and talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. My name is Pace Warfield, and I am the S, which is the only thing that distinguishes the title of this movie from the first movie.
Which is ridiculous. Ridiculous. And I'm Pastor Emily, and I am the airlock that always manages to save the day in the very last moment, which is not distinguishable between the first movie and the second. Follow us on Patreon at patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch, starting at only $5. Oh, it starts at only $5 to sign up, and you get exclusive access to hours of bonus content, including BooTube episodes about TV shows like Star Wars Rebels and Ahsoka, movie commentaries like the Predator movies, bonus episodes, and more.
Woo!
Both specific to this season and past seasons. And check out our show notes for any content warnings for this episode.
Yeah, our Patreon is really where it's at. If y'all haven't gotten to our Patreon yet, that's okay. It's fine. There is a free, there is in fact a free trial that you can do for our $10 tier, and that's running this entire season. So you can check it out.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Maybe I should trial the $10. I'm at the $5, but
Yeah.
yes,
But
I support the podcast that I also co-host.
yes, and I support the podcast the other podcast that Emily co-hosts, and that I have on occasion co-hosted. So, but yeah, our Patreon, there's so much cool stuff on there, like the boob tubes that Emily referenced. We have done covered literally shows like Golden Girls for the boob tubes. That was our very first boob tube, was on the Golden Girls. That was the only boob tube, no, one of two boob tubes that Emily was not a part of. But
we've done Doctor Who a couple different times.
Yeah,
depending
we've done
on the
Doctor
season.
Who, but we also do like legit scary shit too. So like if you're listening to the Alien part of this franchise and you're more into that than you are the Star Wars part,
we did
that's
Rose
fine.
Red.
And we've done Rose Red, we've done Vampire Hunter D, we've done a few scary.
We also did Vampirina.
Yeah. So lots of non-scary ones, scary ones, and everything in between. So check it out. This is really fun. And for the $10 tier, you get full-length regular episodes, but just exclusive to you. Whereas everybody, $5 and $10 tier, gets the boob tubes and the movie commentaries.
It's true. So if you're listening to us wax poetically about Star Wars and you're like, but what about Rogue One or Solo? That's in our horror buff tier.
Or if you really want to hear our thoughts on Ewok's Caravan of Courage.
Also that one, which there was a slight panic moment because we recorded ahead during the strike. There was a slight panic moment that I had a few weeks ago when Pace was like, I don't know if this recorded the whole episode or not for Ewok's Caravan of Courage.
Emily's track fully uploaded, so I was worried.
Yeah, I was like about to panic that I was going to have to watch it again. But phew, did not have to. You get the original.
So yeah, the don't worry, the movie, yes, is trash, but our discussion of it is not. So definitely,
it's true. We did a whole season of Twilight. If you need to know that we can be brilliant and exude brilliance from trash, that is a great example, and that's free. so that can
For everyone.
entice you into the rest of them.
Free. The
Wahaha.
only cost is your soul for having to watch the Twilight movies.
Also, but you don't really have to watch them. You can
It's
just.
true. You can just listen
We've
to us
all
talk about it.
absorbed enough by osmosis that, like,
Right.
we're good. Also, you get a merch discount.
Yeah, you get a merch
That's
discount,
exciting.
which works now. So,
Yeah, it does.
and
Hmm.
we have all sorts of stuff up there from like, uh, what is the word I'm looking for? A Zoom background, stuff like that. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
anyone can access the Zoom backgrounds on our Patreon, but like,
Yeah. But we
we have
can
all
link to
sorts
the
of fun
Zoom
stuff.
background so that people can check it out and see what else they're missing.
Yeah, yeah. So, before we get into the movie we're covering today, though, how have you been, Emily? How is life treating you?
Um, I have been very delightedly nerdy, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, so this season of Horror Nerds at Church and this season of Nerds at Church are lining up so spectacularly. Like, it is just all spacey stuff all the time for me, and I absolutely adore it. So, we just, as of when we're recording this, our episode on the solar system just dropped, and I finished a book that I was reading for it that I started reading like the night, like 36 hours before we recorded. So I didn't finish, but I finally finished that book, How I Killed Pluto and Why It Had It Coming, which
mhm.
was delightful, and really helped me come to terms with my own grief and feelings around that. Apparently, there was also a funeral for Pluto, so that's helpful. And the Pluto killer was there. And he liked my post that I made
Aw.
about the episode because I tagged him in it. um, but yeah, so it's been all solar system all the time. And the next episode that will have already come out by the time this airs was basically a private class with an astrophysicist. So Dr. Katie Mack was on, and basically I got to ask all of my nerdy questions about dark matter and dark energy and all things astrophysics. So it was amazing. Yeah, so I'm just like riding high.
I love it. I love it.
I do have to
Also,
like and I have now started to tour back into Star Wars Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view, which we still need to finish reading so
I
we
feel
can
like we will
record.
probably get to that episode at the end of the season because I don't know how we're going to fit it in, but
What?
we'll see.
I'm here for it. I'm planning on finishing it in February.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see if Pace can finish it. For once, Emily might be
That's true.
waiting on Pace to finish the book instead of the other way around.
That would be a miracle.
So, yeah. Oh, to borrow a question, because you asked this
Oh yeah.
in our.
Wait, how are you doing?
Oh, I am doing well overall. I've just been so busy this past few weeks. I just feel
Mm.
like so scatterbrained with everything going on. But really good news today is that uh, my partner and I got a house that well not we're renting a house. We are approved to rent the house. We are not fancy people who can afford their own property to be clear. But we so we're renting a we got approved for the house we really wanted, which has a huge backyard for the dogs and stuff. So I'm just really excited for that. We found that out earlier today. So looking forward to that. So that's good. But to borrow a question from our friends of the podcast, the Irreverent Bible Talk, are you
Mm.
drinking anything fun? Because you texted about it. So I'm curious
Oh,
if you are drinking something fun.
it's not as fun as when they were on. When they were on, I knew the question was coming, and so I was like, I'm going to make a Sabbath sips. Um, uh, when I had a friend, we had friends visiting over the holidays, and one of them lives in Vermont currently and brought a maple infused bourbon. This is not that because I drank all of that. This is a new bottle that I found at our local liquor store that is maple infused bourbon. That may or may not be the same brand. I couldn't remember, but it's very tasty.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Awesome.
I love
Um,
maple. Are you
Maple's good.
imbibing?
Um, in Pot, yes, and alcohol, no, but I am drinking Mountain Dew Code Red, a favorite of mine. Please
Ooh.
sponsor us, Mountain Dew, because you have lots of money. But I wanted to ask this question specifically because I need to evangelize my love, which is problematic, to be clear, but there is no ethical consumption in capitalism. We know this, but I am obsessed with ruby chocolate. It
No, you
is
were talking about that. I don't know
so
what it is.
good. So Ruby. So first of all, the unethical stuff about chocolate, just in case you don't know, is that chocolate tends to be grown in the near the equator between the two, which is also prime rainforest land. So a lot of chocolate companies use very cheap or slave labor to produce their chocolate, and do not pay fair wages. They also clear out rainforests and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
there's all sorts
John
of
Oliver actually did a phenomenal. I am not generally a huge fan of like the cishet white guys, but John
yeah,
Oliver did a phenomenal episode about chocolate and like basically there's no chocolate that can be 100% guaranteed to be free of slave labor, and there's like one company that pays like 3 times the market value in order and does like actual stuff to try to avoid
yeah.
being slave labor chocolate.
And
But
so just be aware that yes, I know about this, and yes, also chocolate is delicious, and so
mhm.
it's something that I still imbibe in or enjoy as much as I can, given the state of the world. But ruby chocolate is um, the fourth kind of natural base confection produced from cacao beans, which is what chocolate is made out of. So we have dark chocolate, we have milk chocolate, we have white chocolate,
Mhm.
which is made from the oil of the cacao beans, but not
Mhm.
actually the pulp itself, which is why it's white and doesn't have that more bitter flavor of regular chocolate.
Slash any. Uh-huh.
Yes, and all that. And then, but then ruby chocolate was invented about 10, 15 years ago, and it's only really started to become commercially available in the last 5 years or so.
Mm.
But it is a style of chocolate that uses the fat of the cacao beans, with a little bit of the pulp of it. So it still has that bitter chocolate
Mm.
flavor that makes the bulk of dark and milk chocolate that we know of. But because it has a higher fat content from the beans, it has a different flavor profile. So
Mm.
it is this rose-ish color. So
Mhm.
it goes well with Laertes Jerusalem Sunday, which is the fourth Sunday in Lent coming up. So if you want to use it as a sermon illustration, go for it. And then, because pink is the color for that day, just like it is for the third Sunday of
Wow,
Advent.
you're that kind of litter queer. Okay.
Is that wrong? Like, I think it's cool that we can have two Sundays that are pink because pink's a cool color. So of course I want to
Pink
talk.
is a cool color, and I think that's delightful. You're the first person that I've ever known to have said something with like any sort of authority about like, and Lent has a pink day, and it is this day.
Oh well,
So,
yeah. Um. So I know I'm super nerdy now about this, but I'm not
I
going
love
to
it. Keep
apologize.
going. So, finish the
So
story.
yeah, so ruby chocolate is made, like I said, from the fat plus some of the pulp, and cacao beans naturally come in a few colors, but a lot of them have a red or pinkish tint to them. So when you use the higher fat, produces a pink chocolate, which is why it gets the name ruby chocolate. And the flavor has a little bit of that bitterness of regular chocolate that you might recognize, but it also has like a very kind of berry kind of flavor because
Huh.
it's like more of the cacao beans, fat content,
Mm-hmm.
and sucrose content, so it retains the berryness of the chocolate bean.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of tastes a little bit like strawberries and cream, very slightly like that, but still being chocolate and not
Okay.
having any other ingredients aside from milk and sugar and all that stuff that goes into normal chocolate bars.
I might
So
have
you
to try
can
that
find it.
sometime.
Yeah. But ruby chocolate, I love it. So good.
I like it.
So it's my new obsession. I mean, I've been enjoying ruby chocolate since it became commercially available, but like I'm on a ruby chocolate kick lately and can't get enough.
Gotcha.
Um, as far what I've been watching, still
Ooh,
watching
we've
my way.
both been watching
Yeah,
Doctor
a lot of
Who.
Doctor Who.
Also, apparently, our house missed a season of Queer Eye, so we're also circling back around to that.
Apparently, there is drama between Bobby and Tam too that hit the news.
Oh no!
Yeah, I don't know what all it is because neither have like fully said, but like they've unfollowed each other's Instagram accounts and stuff like that. So.
Oh no! Is this the end of Queer Eye?
Well, yeah, yeah. This was the last season, the one that just came out.
It was supposed to be the last
Yeah,
season? Nobody tells me nothing! This is. Oh no!
and that and the feud seemed to come about unrelated to it being the last season. So it's not the last season because of the feud, but the feud is part of the press surrounding the last season. So,
Ugh,
um, anyway, yeah. So
that is so sad.
Doctor Who, and Queer Eye. Anything else you've been watching or reading that you want to shout out?
I've been a little busy on the podcast, so no. There's
Mm,
literally
fair.
nothing else in my life besides those two right now. How
I
about you?
have
You
I have
always have
been
more than that.
yeah, I've been watching Doctor Who, of course, where I am. I started before Emily, and also I've
Mm-hmm.
been sometimes needing before bed to watch a few episodes to like kind of disconnect from the day and stuff. So I've also
Mm-hmm.
been guiding a little bit ahead of my own schedule. So I am nearing the end of the first Doctor's tenure and the end
Ooh,
of the 10th Doctor's tenure in my watch through.
nice. I
So
am. I just finished the Aztecs.
I love
Um,
that episode. I mean, there's so many problematic things in the
right.
episode,
So much
so many,
problematic.
but
Um,
the
but I
general
think,
idea of the episode, I love it. Yeah,
yeah, but I think that's the farthest I've been in Classic Who. So
nice.
I'm not 100% positive, but I've
Yeah,
been keeping just steady. Sometimes with Classic Who, I have to like finish
yeah.
up the next day or start early, but
You are nearing the end of the first season of Classic Who. That's pretty cool.
I'm very excited about that actually.
Um, yeah, and then I've not been watching much movies or stuff, but I have been obsessed with true crime lately. So if I'm not watching Doctor Who to help me fall asleep, ironically as it might seem, I'm watching true crime stuff to fall asleep. And there's this new one called
We call that fun times at the island here.
yeah, I'm watching this one called Mark of Serial Killer, which is on Peacock. It's new to me. It's not a new show, but I don't know why. I'm just really digging that one. And it's also fun in a LOL sob kind of way to notice just how incompetent the police are in all of the serial killer shows and how some of the shows are better at like being frank about that and sharing the facts and others
Hmm.
try to like hide the fact that the
Yeah,
police
I
are awful
remember when
and
I
do like
used to watch those
propaganda.
shows.
So
Yeah, yeah. It's I also the other day I was having trouble falling asleep and I was like, "You know what? I've never watched the Barbie movie." So I put that on, but
oh,
I put the ASL version on and it's really cool cuz it just has like a little person in the corner signing the whole thing and I really love that. So,
yeah,
I'm excited about that.
ASL is one thing. I am notoriously my brain does not grasp languages the way that many other people do. So I just am very, very bad at like I'm really good at learning the um what is the word I'm looking for? The grammar of a language. I am
Mhm.
not good at retaining any vocabulary. So
Mhm.
signing is something I've always wanted to learn, but I just find it very difficult to retain.
I have heard that for folks where languages in general are hard, that signing can be actually easier or not as hard in the same way, at least because it's such a physical one
Yeah.
instead of a verbal one,
I've heard
which would
that
which
too.
would help me. But I also am good at languages, so
I yeah, I heard that too, and I have taken a few sign language like not like a full class, but like seminars and stuff over my years as like continue ed, and it just doesn't stick with. Like I know a portion of the alphabet, but like that's it. So I even find sign language hard in my experience. It doesn't mean that doing a more intensive course wouldn't help. But I also heard that about Hebrew. Like one of my
I
Hebrew
love
professors, so
Hebrew.
of course biased, said that Hebrew is for many people who have issues learning languages. Hebrew seems to be easier. Not in my experience.
My experience is that when people are learning biblical languages, they're either Hebrew people or Greek people, and not usually both. That they tend towards one or the other being easier or harder.
I found
But
both incredibly difficult, and I took both. I've taken
and look
coursework.
at you being a PhD. Hey,
Yeah.
shout out to all the PhDs who have to learn languages and pass exams in those languages, even when it's hard.
Yes. Thank God like I said, I am good at retaining grammar, but not on vocabulary. So thank God the school I go to, Graduate Theological Union, lets you use a dictionary for it. So like that's the only way I passed. And I had to look
How
up.
about just thankfully,
Yes.
I was able to use tools that are very helpful, and I passed.
I did. I did.
You passed. Period. Doesn't matter what tools you did or did not use. You passed.
Yeah. The only language I have some kind of vocabulary ingrained is French, but that's just because all of my I took French in middle school and high school. And then literally every single higher education program has done French like as a requirement that I've done. So college, grad school, and PhD. So like French I know better than others, and still
Mm.
I really struggle with the vocabulary in French, even though I know the stuff.
It's
But
because
anyway,
they French is made up of um, just like utter ridiculousness where they were paid by word count, by letter count, and so they just added extra letters that don't make sounds when they were writing it down.
I do
Just
not
makes it
think
hard.
that's true, but okay.
That's the folklore.
I do not think that's true.
Well,
Um,
feel free to tell me what the actual history is, but nobody has corrected me so far. Maybe this will be our first angry letter.
yeah, maybe
Oh,
not our
speaking
Star
of, I
Wars.
should probably
Surprisingly, y'all have been
check.
quiet on that one so far. Um, so that was a long time. I don't even know how we got to that, but yay, we're talking about the movie Aliens
Mm-hmm.
by James Cameron, or not by, directed by James Cameron. Came out in 1986, the year after I was born. And that was the same year of a few big movies, including Top Gun, Star Trek
Mm.
4, which is A Voyage Home, which is many people's favorite. It's the one with the whales, if people know what that means.
It took me multiple tries to like realize that was Star Trek and not Star Wars.
Oh,
Maybe that'll. Maybe I'll just like say as much as I can just to piss people off, so that we get some fan mail.
I don't want to troll our listeners.
I do.
Um, go for it. But then
I
Ferris,
literally made a Pluto poll in Nerds
you
at
did.
Church.
You did.
I'm here for the
Um,
trolling. I love you all. I
yeah.
just miss your voices and want to hear from you.
Also came out that year, the comedy classic Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is a really fucked up movie if you watch it again. So watch it. Short Circuit, another fucked up movie because there's some brown skin acting going on in there.
Ooh.
In the 1986. Come on, you'd think we would have been past
Yo,
that by
that was the day. That was the year of my birth, which was the most important thing that came out that day. Me, from the
disagree
womb.
because Care Bears movie 2 A New Generation came out that year. That
That's
is
more important
probably the
than me.
only movie that I would rank higher in my love than my dear friend Emily. Sorry.
Wow, wow. I'm gonna have to rethink my priorities.
I
Jeez.
just love Care Bears. Anyway, sorry. An American Tail came out that year. The Great Mouse Detective came out that year. So two competing mouse animated films.
Because
Um,
mices are cool.
yes. Cheeses for our Mises, to quote uh, Muppets: A Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm.
But then in
Speaking
the
of mice,
yep. But then in
critters in the house.
yeah, so In our horror realm, what came out in 1986 was House, Critters. Critters direct would have a sequel directed by the director of Lord of the Rings. So I'm blanking on his name right now, but not many people know he got his start in
Jackson?
horror movies.
Peter?
Yeah, Peter Jackson. He's directed a few horror movies, and they're all really good.
Hmm.
And people don't tend to think of him as a horror director, but that's how he got his start. Um, Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, came out that year. Labyrinth came out that year. Speaking of Muppets, Jim Henson
Mm.
film.
I
Psycho
think I saw that
2,
once.
Howling 2. Oh, maybe we should do a crossover movie commentary on that because it's a horror movie, so perfect for this podcast, and it's a
And it's
Muppet
a
movie, so
Muppets
perfect.
movie.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
fantastic. I like it.
The Howling 2, Your
And
Sisters Are
it's out of
Werewolves
this
came out.
world.
Yes. Yes. Maximum Overdrive, which is Stephen King's only directorial film, where that he it's based off one of his short stories, but he also directed the movie, and it is awful. And he was also, but he also has
That's why
admitted he
it's
was
his own.
high on coke the entire time, so
Oh,
you can tell. um, I think everybody in that production was high on coke. And
that's
then
true.
Friday the 13th, Part 6, which we have covered in season 2 of this podcast,
And we
the,
will eventually cover in
with
movie
Emily. Yeah.
commentaries.
Um, Jason Lives is one we covered with Abel, and then Jason Takes Manhattan is one we covered with Carla. And I feel like those are the
Jason
two
Takes
of the funniest
Manhattan.
back-to-back episodes we've ever had on the podcast. Um, and then we had The Fly came out that year, the remake with Jeff Goldblum, another fantastic movie I can't wait to cover on the podcast. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and a favorite of mine, Little Shop of Horrors.
Which I've never actually seen. I've just seen parts of like the songs and stuff, even though that is how I dressed up my basil for Little Basil Shop of Horrors for the first ever pet and plant costume contest.
Yep, yep, and one. So,
Mm-hmm. I have seen more of the non-horror movies than horror movies this time.
which is usual. It's just that one time. I
Yeah, that
think,
one time was weird.
yeah. Um. So, what was your first memory of seeing this film or experiencing the film?
Cheers, y'all! Last week for this episode.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I was giving this question more thought since we recorded our Alien episode because if you remember in that episode, I said I don't fully remember when I first saw the franchise,
Mm-hmm.
any of the entries in the franchise. But I know it's somewhere in childhood, middle school, high school, around there. I'm pretty sure it's middle school, so I was right around the age of 12. So I'm not sure if he would take a drink or not, but it was definitely at my dad's house. And they were having a marathon. It was a Saturday day because my parents were divorced, so I'd spend every other weekend at my dad's house. And so on Saturdays, oftentimes we would just watch in the. And this had maybe I was in younger than 12 because I probably was in middle school because there wasn't much to do on a rainy day back then before like the advent of smartphones and high speed internet and stuff like that. Like we had internet but not much,
Besides,
so like
go outside.
on a rainy day, I mean you can go outside on a rainy day, but if you don't want to get wet, and
Oh.
wet clothes is a sensory issue for me as somebody on the spectrum.
Ah.
um
Okay, fair. I was gonna
I
say jumping in puddles.
Yeah. So I would. So we were marathoning. I'm pretty sure it was like on TNT or some network was marathoning the Alien film. So we watched that. So I probably
Hmm.
was around 12, 11, 12, 13, somewhere in that age range. And so
Shots all around then.
yeah, so I saw this movie for the first time as part of that. And my
Nice.
dad was a fan of the series. So I remember he was excited when it came on to TNT. And that's one of the reasons we watched it. And I honestly loved the movies when I saw them too.
Hmm. Cool.
So there we go.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any background for this one, Emily? Sorry, I
That's
feel like I
cute.
need to
That's
call
cute. The
you
only time
out.
I've ever had like considerable background was the first movie, and half of that was because you had typed it out, and the other half was because I had watched the movie commentary episode
Yeah, yeah.
or the movie commentary. Yeah. No, I got nothing.
Um,
I already said the most important background, which is that it was the year of my birth. So
yes. And the year. the more important thing, which is the year of the Care Bear movie. Sorry, I love you. I'm kidding. It's not real. I mean, maybe it's a little real. I don't know.
I was like, don't lie. Don't lie to me. I can take it. I'm strong. Break my heart, paste stubs.
Sorry, it's just
Did
funny
you know
too.
that paste stubs sounds a lot like pay stubs?
Yeah, I know
I just realized that.
a lot of things. My first name especially sounds like because I have been hearing feedback. Not feedback. I don't mean it that way. Please do not start writing angry letters to my boss. I should probably cut this out. But I've been jokingly her saying people never catch my name when she talks about it. They always think it's something else because first of all, Pace is a name that not many people have. And if they do have the name, it's usually um, like the Spanish equivalent of Paco or the Italian
Mm,
equivalent of Pace as opposed to
mm,
Pace.
mm-hmm,
Um, so it's a unique name, but also it just sounds like a lot of other things, like you were saying with paste
mm-hmm.
stubs and stuff. So apparently, my name is hard for people to get. So when people just say it in conversation, which
Which is
I never really
ironic
thought about, but I
because
also
it's
don't really
like
care because it's my
one
name,
syllable
right?
and an actual word. It's the
It,
iconic non binary name.
yes, and it rhymes, but it rhymes with so much shit like
It really
space,
does.
face,
Ace.
ace,
Ace of bases,
pace.
paces.
Yeah. Okay. We will eventually get to the background.
What?
I'll try. So, can you tell this could be an off the rails episode
Uh
already,
huh.
listeners? We're at 32 minutes in, and we're just getting to actually talk about the background. So,
You say that like they don't expect that from us all the time.
right.
I blame this on you. I asked if we were drinking, and you said, "Yeah, go get a drink."
But I'm also getting elevated, so that's both of us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, to the back behind the scenes. So, after the first movie came out, it was kind of a sleeper hit. It became a runaway success, kind of a cult classic. The iconography of the film, especially the design of the aliens, as we spent a lot of time talking about by Geiger, um, really like seared that film and the chestburster scene and stuff, seared that
Mm-hmm.
film into like the public imagination.
Mm.
And yet, 20th Century Fox wasn't quite on board with the sequel.
Mm.
By the time the movie really started to become popular, it was the late 80s. Empire Strikes Back had just come out, and they knew there was going to be a third Star Wars film in 1983, which we'll cover as we were just talking about. But it, Fox kind of felt like the space craze was, or the space fad was starting to slow down or end after Star Wars.
Never.
So they didn't think it would get much profit, and they also kind of thought the first film was a fluke. As we know about the evilness of many corporations, especially Hollywood studio corporations, as we saw at the WGA SAG after strikes, but they tend to like have a very particular cis white gaze approach to what they think audiences want in a movie. And
Mm-hmm.
so that fact that Alien was successful being front led by a woman, um, they thought was like a fluke or a weird thing and not actually something that people would like. So it just kind of, so Fox just didn't seem super interested in making it. But when Return of the Jedi came out and it was still like Star Wars is still very much a thing and space was still very much a thing, they decided to start looking for a script for and start like doing early pre-production stuff for the movie. Um, they came across the script to the film Terminator by James Cameron, and
Mm.
Terminator was already in development, but it was basically Terminator is a horror movie with like imagine a horror movie with Rambo as an antagonist, and that
Mm-hmm.
is what Terminator is. Um, and so uh, they kind of like love that idea for it, since Alien was a horror movie, to kind of go in that direction. So they hired Cameron to do a initial approach for it, and he was in pre-production for Terminator, so he just wrote a script treatment. They didn't really think he would be the director, but then after Terminator came out and was a huge success in 1984, they officially hired Cameron on to direct the movie as well. But he immediately signed on and wrote a treatment within 3 days of signing, and he loved the idea of
What's a
having
treatment?
a script treatment. So basically, like a instead of like a script with like the full dialogue and scenes and stuff, an early treatment is basically like you describe in a fair amount of detail the plot, but you're not going into like every single line, you're not going to every
Mm.
single scene,
Okay.
so it's kind of like that. And it was like 46 pages long. Like he really was into this.
Huh.
So but he and some of the production people decided to have Rambo do Rambo in space and have space marines was the big thing. So there is this episode of one of my favorite podcasts in the world, behind Nerds at Church, of course.
Naturally.
Is It's a defunct podcast now, but it is still one of my favorites. It's called "I Was There Too," hosted by Matt Gorley, and
Mm.
he did an episode where basically the point of that podcast is you would interview like the background character actors in a movie as
Ooh.
opposed to the main characters or the
It's like
director
from a
or the
certain
writer.
point of view,
Yeah,
but
pretty
with the
much
actors.
like a whole podcast though. That was that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he interviewed Jeanette Goldstein, who played Vasquez in the movie, and it
Ah.
is such a great episode. So I'll try to link that in this show notes if it's not behind a
Yeah.
paywall.
I want to watch that. Listen to that.
But I meant to listen to that again because they go into some of the background of Aliens, but I didn't have a chance to. But
Yeah.
what I do remember is that Sigourney Weaver originally didn't want to return. She was convinced when conversations with Cameron revealed that this wasn't just a money grab by the studio, but Cameron really wanted to tell a message and have the movie have some emotional depth.
Mm.
I don't think it does. We'll get there. Anyway, also the production was apparently difficult because James Cameron is notoriously difficult to work with,
Hmm.
and people tend not to say nice things about him after they do movies with him. Um,
Ooh.
yeah, like Titanic, apparently, like so many takes that the actors got hypothermia and stuff like that from being in the pool, all sorts of stuff. So, but this movie still became super successful, which guaranteed a third film, and that one sat in production hell a little bit. We'll get into that in the next movie. But it's this movie is considered to be a favorite of many people in the franchise because it is really fun. It's an action movie. It's meant to be fun, whereas the first one's moody and atmospheric, and you have to think about it and scary. This one's just fun. So a lot of people just
Mm-hmm.
like the funness of this one, and I will agree, it's a pretty fun movie. And then there is an extended version, a director's cut, and it reveals that Ripley had a daughter who died of old age while she was asleep in space. Well, Ripley was asleep in space, and that's the biggest difference. There's some alternate takes and stuff in there, but it does give some new insight into Ripley's relationship with the Queen alien mother, and then also Ripley's relationship with Newt, played by Carrie Henn, the young girl that she finds
Yeah.
and kind of adopts in a sense as a daughter.
And her, like, when she does decide to go in the first place, it's like nobody is, like, none of her family who was there initially is left.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she basically like wakes up to a whole new world. Like that's wild, and they
Yeah.
really don't talk about that even in the director's film, aside from the line about her daughter. But I mean, that in itself, I think they could have spent a lot of time. Like, I mean, that there are many movies made about that itself. So like people kind of
Yeah.
waking up to a different time. Um, what is your one sentence summary of this movie?
Ripley is still the only competent one.
So sad, but so true.
I mean, Newt is pretty competent, but
Yeah,
also
she
like
is.
a
She is.
traumatized kid, so meh.
Yeah. My one sentence summary, if you recall, for the first movie was slasher in space. My one sentence for this one is slashers in spaces. because you have to add the S to it. That's the only
Ugh,
thing different.
there's so much wrong with that.
I honestly think now it's like
I mean, it's
overdone,
hilarious,
but
but
I
like
think it's
for real.
really clever to have the first movie, there's one alien. The second movie, there's many. And so just adding the S to it makes it that much more scary going into it. It's clever, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
obnoxious, especially now
Mm-hmm.
that it's overdone.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we can roll through the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I will start.
I
I'll
no,
go
I gotta
for it.
go first because mine is the opening
Please.
scene. That
Yeah,
scene when they have like the machine scan the spaceship is fascinating. The like it looks so cool because you get the like swirly patterns of dust and stuff. I love it.
it is really cool. I basically the whole first part of the movie when she's on Earth is her arguing with men and not being listened to. Like
Uh-huh.
that's the entire femme women and most probably non-binary people experience just
Mm-hmm.
not being listened to by men. So that in of itself is a horror. Um,
Yeah. Also, there were multiple points in this movie where I was like, I called it, and I have the evidence because I typed in my notes as we were watching. I called it when I think Ripley even said that Burke that was the only one that she trusts, and I was like, why would you trust
mhm.
Burke? Like, who thinks Burke is trustworthy? And then I was like, well, at least he goes with her, so like his life is
Yeah.
also in it and at risk. But nope, I was right. Not
Mhm.
trustworthy. Yeah.
And I I love that Burke wears like this suit. I get like basically their version of what a 2300 suit would look like, which is basically what a suit in the 80s looked like, but with a little bit of a thinner tie. I was like, okay, cool. So space age ties, kind of weird, but kind of love it.
Mm-hmm.
And also Burke is agreed. So swarmy from the get go. I don't
Yeah.
nothing about him I like or trust.
Yeah. And then we got to Vasquez, who like I loved the character of Vasquez.
Right.
Stereotypical butch lesbian, Latino lesbian, right? Like and then I right after I like wrote that, I was like, she's gonna die, isn't she?
Yeah.
Called it
Yep.
again.
But I do love the queer coding of some. I mean, now it's definitely a trope, to be clear. And yet, I also just love that there is room in space in this franchise for for queer women, which there is not in many science fiction franchises from the 70s and 80s. So,
Yeah, yeah. Also, Jonesy got lucky this time and got to stay safe. Which, when they did that, I was like, okay. I didn't know. I didn't have words. I didn't write it down. But there was something in me that was like, okay, something is like, what's going to be the Jonesy in this one?
mm,
Newt. Newt is the
yep,
Jonesy. So
exactly.
I didn't write it down, but I had an inkling.
Hmm.
Also, I have a gnat or something flying around my head, so that's my weird flappy grabby motions.
um,
Also, I love space.
right. I feel like there is not as much um, interest in this movie being scientifically accurate as in the first one. And the first one, even there is like some hard things to sell, especially to Emily, like the water and
Mm-hmm.
HVAC system and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and artificial gravity. But this one, I feel like there's even less just concern for it. It's
Yeah. Well, and I think so. In the last 2 weeks or whatever, Kay and I recorded our Nerds at Church episode, which is like our ninth episode. So not coming out for a little bit, but we recorded it on space travel and pop culture.
Mhm.
And yes, okay. So we recorded on space travel and pop culture, and there's like different ways that different like franchises or whatever decide to organize their universe. Some try to be like super scientific and accurate and right like Interstellar or Martian. Both of those. And part of it is that the science is part of the plot. And then there are others like Doctor Who or Star Wars where like it's not about the science and the
Hmm.
science is not integral to the plot. And so they just say like it's just a like in this universe this is how it works and we invite you to suspend disbelief to enter
Hmm.
fully into the universe. And so I feel like that's where they were like shifting into. It's
Yeah.
not my default. And so the first movie I was like,
I think you
mm.
will love when we get to Star Trek at some point because Star Trek definitely tries to be more scientific.
Kay and I mentioned it on the podcast that you and Kay have a plot and a scheme to get me to watch it. So,
Yeah, so we'll see.
hmm
I love Star Trek, personally. It's very problematic too, but like what long running franchise of any genre or kind is not problematic?
hmm
Um,
mm. Also, I don't like military. Like
right.
those guys are jerks, literally in the movies.
They are. They are.
Also, it seemed like they just dropped people through space without spacesuits or helmets.
At that point, I believe they were in the planet's atmosphere, but still, again, not trying to be scientifically accurate in any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, but like there's like not caring for scientific precision and there's not caring about science.
Yeah. I mean, I will give James Cameron one piece of credit to him, which is that he has grown in his care about science. The Avatar movies are have a closer adherence to science than he
Yeah, but
does.
those are just like slightly veiled imperialism.
Yes, for sure.
So what I'm hearing is I'm just like not particularly interested in James Cameron.
Same. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
we can agree
Got
on
it.
that. um, he is a very beloved director, though, so by many people. So if you are a James Cameron fan, please feel free to write in and tell us what you like about him or his
What
movies.
redeeming quality there could possibly be since he treats people terribly and doesn't care about science.
Formerly doesn't care about science.
Well,
um, yeah, I do like the concept though of this movie, like the idea of while Ripley's been asleep, the planet has been colonized or is in the process of being colonized.
hmm
And then the slowly unraveling mystery of this one is that it was done so intentionally once again by the Utani Corporation to access the aliens like it was in the first one. But I just love the idea that like it ups the stakes so much in that now there's actually people there and beyond just a small crew, but there's people there and we learn that most of them are dead and then we meet Newt and all that. But um, it's just a very interesting way to increase the stakes from the first film in a way that feels very much like related to the concept of the first film.
yeah. So, just for clarity, the colonists on the planet are sent there. Why do they think they're sent there?
To colonize the planet with a few operatives among them to also look for the aliens
So
who
people
are
just
like,
like want to go colonize a planet for funsies with their family.
yes.
Hmm. Okay. And then the real reason that they go, that the company sends them, is to look for aliens.
Yeah, to look for the xenomorphs because they want to use them for military and make a lot of money off of them.
So Brick, who is it? The asshole.
Burke?
Burke. So Burke, the whole time, knows that he's just flat out lying to Ripley and that they
Yes.
were looking for aliens intentionally and that there is no intention to destroy them all.
But maybe not the whole time, but at very least by the time he is sent out there, he knows. I feel like in the beginning he doesn't know, and in his initial conversations with her, he doesn't know. But this is just my own reading of the film.
That's
Um,
very generous. That's very Eighth Commandment of you.
but then once he goes back to them, and it's like Ripley is saying this really weird thing about the aliens, and they're like, "Come here, we have to tell you," and they like tell him at that point. Is how I read
Huh.
it, but he could have known the whole time. True.
I mean, he's a sleazeball, so who knows?
Yeah.
I did love one of the things that I absolutely adore is kids are brilliant.
Hmm.
So there was somebody who sent me, I think Kay sent it to me. There was this thing of like talking to this kid, and this kid is like, I was born really far away from my sibling. They're like, yeah, you're like born almost exactly 6 months apart. The farthest away, I think is what they said. They're like, no, like on the other side of the sun. And I was like,
Oh,
which is true about me and my sibling. My sibling had to travel around the sun 1.5 times, and we were born at like almost exactly the farthest apart we could ever have been born.
that
Um,
is
which
brilliant, though.
is
Look at that.
yeah. And so then when Ripley's trying to bond with Newt, and it's like, well, does Casey have bad dreams? I don't think Casey has bad. Like, should we ask? And then Newt's like, Ripley, Casey doesn't have bad dreams because she's plastic. It's
Yeah.
like this kid is well beyond the area of make believe. Like, does not need to make believe
Right.
anything because reality is terrifying.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep.
love kids.
I also just love basically this is one of the first movies, and I want to talk about this in a deep dive too, but it's one of the first women fronted action movies. The first one was a woman fronted horror movie with some action elements, I would say, and sci-fi too. Whereas this one is very much an intention, like it's basically the plot of the other movies we're covering, Predator, very similar plot.
Mm-hmm.
Marines going up against an alien, like, but this is the first one of that very kind of consistent genre of 80s action movies that has a woman as a protagonist. And
Mm-hmm.
so I love that Ripley is the gender bending action hero, and and like she even cuts her hair shorter in this movie and stuff. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
she's queer coded too. I don't know. We can talk about Ripley's sexuality as we go on,
Mm-hmm.
because it's never like explicitly said, but each of the movies kind of I feel like has a little bit different take on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then in that face off in the yellow loading, like there's that scene which kind of jokes about the sexism of her doing the loading machine in the beginning and proving to the guys that she can do all that stuff that they think she can't do because she's a woman. But then in the end she uses that very machine to fight off the alien, who is
Gosh.
also a woman, of that species, of the xenomorph species, or described to be. Not that we can say for sure what kind of sex or gender something that is not even from this planet would have. But um the two face off in this really epic battle, and it's just like such high action movie camp and galore and all the camp of 80s action, but to have it be Ripley doing it is just like such a, nowadays we don't think about it in the days post Buffy, but this is really the first time that this happened, where we there's like a woman who saves the day in an action movie role.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's part of what Star Wars was too, right? Having Leia be not just a princess, but like a princess who fights for her, who literally and physically
Yeah.
fights for her people.
And yet, even in that one, as we talked about, like she's still a side character. It's Luke's narrative. She's along for the ride
Well,
in the first movie. And also,
clearly, Pace, you have not read our most recent newsletter that went out where I explain who the main character is, and
yes, yes.
Leia is
But
definitely the second character, like the main organic,
I
if
love
you
it.
will.
I love it. Yes. But also, there's still that romantic love triangle that they're setting up in the first movie and second, and that kind of gets resolved in the third one. Whereas Ripley, like, there
Gets
is no,
resolved. They find out they're siblings,
yeah,
Pace.
and it fixes it. Problem solved. Because then it's taboo to continue. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but this one, like, it kind of like you can read if you're being generous that the dude Michael Bain, I don't Hicks, that's his name in the movie, um, is could be a love interest for her, but like there's nothing in the movie itself or the text of the movie itself, I would say.
He's just not a terrible
That,
human being,
yeah, that makes it
which makes
explicit that
him automatically a love interest by default.
yes, and yet there's no kissing, there's no romance, there's no like
Hmm.
really flirting or
Well,
anything.
and
So
she ditches him to go back for the kid.
yeah, exactly. And she like he's kind of the damsel in distress. She saves him and then also doesn't hook up with him because she's like not creepy, like how all
Yeah.
the guys who save damsels in distress try to hook up with her after saving her. Gross.
Hmm.
Anyway, so like there's just so I just there's something about the character of Ripley that is A ahead of its time and B still very fresh in today's world where we still have movies that do not give women like Buffy in many ways was very fresh and stuff like that
Hmm.
in some ways. And yet also she is still very much sexualized throughout the whole show and played
Hmm.
as a romantic character. And that's a major motivation for her. Whereas Ripley, no romantic stuff, not really much. There's a little bit here and there of sexualizing her. Especially because both of the movies we watched thus far have been directed by cis men,
Hmm.
and yet like that's not a major interest in her, and she even like cuts her hair in this movie and wears kind of like in the first movie wears more gender ambiguous androgynous clothes.
Hmm.
So I just love that. It's rare to have that even today. So
Yeah. Also, my like young Power Ranger fan heart was like, "It's morphin' time!" when she got into the big yellow loading machine. It was like,
yeah,
all right. I was like, yes, go
and
Power Ranger.
that line I won't say the B word because we've talked about that specific word in past episodes. I'm trying to remember which one. I can't think of it, but I'll try to find a link in the show notes. But that line though is still iconic when she says, "Get away from her, you be," and like that has been parodied, referenced so much throughout history, but it's still considered like ranked in many rankings of most iconic lines in a movie is usually ranked in the top 10 or 20.
I mean, a certain book series that I used to love has its own spin on like "Not My Daughter," right? Like,
Yeah.
which I didn't know came from this, but I
Yeah.
guarantee it did because of
Oh,
who
yeah,
the
for
author
sure.
is. But yeah.
Um, that was I guess I got a little bit into the deep dive there ahead of time. So we'll go back to the plot. Continue gaily forward, Emily.
I did like when Burke turned off the camera, I was like, of course he does. Of course he's turning off the camera. And there's like, there's always a stowaway.
Hmm.
Anytime there's like sticky stuff, you're
Yeah.
like, oh, there's an alien on board. Good luck.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And then the end of this movie just has such symmetry. You mentioned before the airlock,
Mm-hmm.
but then also the going back to sleep in a pod. Just so it ends very
Mm,
similarly to the first movie, and I like that callback.
yeah. Yeah. I was like, 2 points for the airlock, even if she really would not have survived that. Like,
Yeah.
A, she could not have held on if the alien couldn't hold on. Um, and nobody wears their shoes that tight. Even when my shoes are on good, they're not that tight.
Yeah.
Like, mm-mm.
Yeah. So again, not too concerned with science in this movie
Yeah,
and how stuff actually works.
yeah. But there were like, I was when Newt was rescued, and I was like, okay, of course you have to have Newt like get caught and then rescued again. But the like laying down in the like sleep pods with Newt, I mean in separate sleep pods but next to each other with Newt, I was like, aw, yeah,
Yeah, it's cute.
mm-hmm.
And also similar, like you were saying, Newt is the new Jonesy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's always got to be a Jonesy,
Yeah.
so they tell me.
Okay. Anything else, or are we feeling deep dive?
I'm ready to dive right in. Got my
Sweet.
oxygen mask and everything. Just kidding. We don't give
Deep
people oxygen
diving.
masks in this world.
Yeah. Diving deeply, deeply.
Please
Diving,
dive in.
diving deeply. You're
The whole
welcome.
song. I'm sure
Yep.
Face will have just played it because that was a terrible transition for us.
um, something
So,
that,
oh
yeah,
yeah,
go, please go first.
I was just gonna say, so trauma, eh?
Right.
Right, like she clearly has maybe not PTSD, but trauma. Like
Hmm.
I don't know how to properly diagnose PTSD, but she is having night terrors
Yep.
that are very realistic.
Yep.
That dream is terrifying.
Right.
And then Newt is like sitting there, clearly a very traumatized little girl, and the military are like, just grab her.
Yep.
That'll go great. And even Ripley does not have the best way of doing it. Like it's not until Ripley just like follows her to her safe place that they finally start to connect. But like
Which I
just
also,
grabbing a
I,
traumatized person of any age when they're in the middle of like terror is not helpful.
which I also kind of appreciate, though, that Ripley needs to grow into a maternal figure in this, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to it just being written into her character that because she's a woman, she's automatically going to be maternal to this person. And so I do like
Yeah.
that uh, piece, even though it's not great interaction with Newt in the beginning. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, and grief and loss also just kind of plays throughout. And
Yeah.
that is one thing I will say about Ripley's arc in the series is that is especially 2, 3, and 4 in the franchise really look at continue to examine grief and the trauma that she survived and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that.
Yeah.
And also her willingness to kind of confront the source of her trauma, which is an interesting move and kind of cool. And we'll see how that continues to play out in future entries.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was editing our Alien episode like legit yesterday. We're
Because
recording
it
this on
just
a
came out
Thursday because it
today.
came out today. So this is when we're recording this movie is the day that the Alien episode came out. But as I was listening through the deep dive, I'm like, we actually didn't talk about religion or theology at all. And I was like, oh. And that movie is a fairly religious movie. So I'm like, I don't know. Like we had really good deep dive, but still we were talking more about like horror as a genre and talking about body horror and talking about the genitalia design of the alien and the eggs and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a really good conversation. But we didn't actually talk about religion. So I'm like, I'm going to make a point to talk about religion
Yeah, because tell
after
me
this
about
one.
the religion part because I didn't bring it up because I was like, because it didn't occur to me,
Yeah.
which
So
is like my own thing,
first,
but.
one of the things that I noticed about this movie is that religion is absent from the lives of the characters. They just do not have, there's
Yeah.
no mention of religion or anything like that. People will say like, "Oh my God" and stuff like that, but like as a colloquialism, without it,
Mm-hmm.
there doesn't seem to be a sense of God behind there. And so I just find that interesting that that was a choice. And in many ways, action movies, like you don't get into the internal lives of characters that much in the 80s kind of action movie stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like for this the speed of the script, the pacing of the movie, you just kind of focus on the action and getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So like I get that's a choice, but also I find it just fascinating that it's just absent in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And also in the
I
theming of the movie, because the first movie has this brooding kind of mysticism, and the fact that they refer to the computer as mother, who's this voice that just kind of talks out of the ether and stuff like that. And then this one, there's just nothing like that.
yeah, which I think is also interesting. Um, I one of the people that I follow on TikTok is Sim Kern, and they are a Jewish author, and I just bought their latest book to read, which is called The Free People's Village, which is like if Gore had won the election, but it's still a futuristic dystopia. Um, but they talk, sometimes they do, they like mention stuff about writing script, writing books and like tropes, and
Hmm.
particularly anti-Semitic tropes. And one of the ones that they pointed out is anytime there is a culture where people are disconnected from their history, or their history is doesn't matter. So like I think about the Divergent series, right? Nobody remembers their history. Um,
Hmm.
that is anti-Semitic, because and not just anti-Semitic, right? But it is written specifically from the point of view of people who aren't as connected to their history, and like Jewish people are always connected to their history. And so having something where people just are not connected to their history, there's no telling of their history, there's no counting of their history or anything, whether or not they still hold those like religious and theological and cultural beliefs, but like that connection is always important. Um,
Yeah.
so I thought that was really an interesting thing, and I think it's interesting to like think about in this series, and whenever we're thinking about like fantasy and science fiction and stuff, of like what are even the possibilities for cultures when they're created to not have a history or to not
Yeah.
acknowledge their history.
And I think a piece of that in the universe of this movie is the universe that they're showing is hyper capitalistic
Mm-hmm.
and done in such a way that everything needs to be monetized. There is no room for creativity or imagination. And so I feel like that also is kind of a commentary on capitalism and empire in and of itself. um, and so this, I will say that I think that this movie is the least religious of the franchise.
Which
um,
is why we're talking about religion.
yeah, but yet there's
Mm-hmm.
still some things here. um, First, the planet is named in this that the alien is on, LV-426. LV is a common abbreviation for Leviticus, Book of the
I did
Bible. So
not
if you look
know
up,
this.
so
This
if
is
you look up
fascinating.
this citation, it is all its fat he shall return into smoke on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of well-being. Thus the priest shall make atonement on his behalf for his sin, and he shall be forgiven. And that is the NRSV translation that I quoted there. And so
Huh.
there is this messianic theme of sacrifice that appears in this movie a few times. And first, it's kind of setting us up, I think, to think that Ripley will sacrifice herself for Newt. And that ultimately
Mm,
doesn't happen. It's Bishop who sacrifices himself for Newt and for Ripley. And so
yeah.
that's a little bit of a twist. And it's also a twist on the first movie where the robot was the bad guy, and now he in this movie he's the good guy. He's the one that saves the day.
He's
Or doesn't
okay.
save the day, Ripley saves the day, but he helps Ripley save the day.
Yeah,
Um,
which I which is also fascinating. So part of what I think is interesting about that, what you're saying, Pace, is the because last time we talked about like a redemption, we talked about redemption arcs, right?
mhm.
And so like we don't have a redemption arc for whatever the robot is, whoever it is, the science dude in the first one.
From the first one, Ash. Yeah.
Ash, yeah. We don't have what for Ash, which is interesting because Ash Wednesday is coming up, and now I've
Mhm.
got all the things, right? Because Bishop and Ash, and we don't have a redemption arc for Ash. Ash just burns up. There's no redemption. And yet Bishop is the redemption arc in
Yeah.
many ways. And part of it is that they're able to know that Bishop is a robot,
Yep.
which like Ripley didn't believe before. And so she already is like on her guard, and Bishop knows it.
Mhm.
And there's like clear conversations and intentionality that they have that
Yeah.
can happen because it's not sneakily added in to the crew or whatever. Um, but also it's this like maybe the artificial human is not all bad, which then like part of me is like, and yet AI and technology, and I'm a Luddite, and I am
Mhm.
terrified of what quote unquote AI is going to do right now because it's so unregulated, and it's not actually AI, and it's like filled with all of our biases, and yet
Yeah,
people assume that it's not, and assume that it's not going to lie, and it can lie.
yeah.
Um and it also reminded me of um the Foundation. The second season of
Mhm.
Foundation just came out, and um we watched it. And
Yeah, speaking of, check out our episode on the first season with Lenny Duncan.
yes, because that was fantastic. That's why I watched the second season, is because Lenny got us into the first season. um But, and this is spoilers if you haven't finished the second season or are unfamiliar with the books, but the who's the robot in that one?
I don't
What's her
remember.
what's her name? The servant
Yeah,
person.
I don't remember her name.
Um Demerzel.
Mm,
Laura Byrne plays Demerzel. Demerzel has sworn, has like been programmed that she cannot harm. Demerzel has been programmed so that she cannot harm humans, but then that shifts a little bit, but also is like programmed to be loyal to Cleon. And then it turns out that, like, in the end, the loyalty is actually to the first Cleon and
mm,
not to all the Cleons. And what that looks like for Empire and for all of these different, like, it's just fascinating.
yeah,
um
I
but that
still haven't
that
watched
like
season
dynamic
two,
of like how we restrict and don't restrict. And yeah.
but that was also making me. I need to watch season two because that's fascinating. But also it makes make me think of the Matrix franchise, which
Mm.
I think we need to cover on this podcast too. We'll just add
Mhm.
it to the list.
Mhm.
There's so much goodness and intentional religious stuff going on in those movies. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, we'll probably do a YouTube on season two of um, Foundation at some
Mm.
point
Yeah, we could do
one
that.
of these days. Um, but I think that AI and technology in general, but AI specifically, is something that we will need to track and talk about in our retrospective for the Alien franchise because it keeps coming back and it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, that also kind of makes me think of one of the questions of right to life in that this movie brings up, and the question of, and of course we know that people who are anti-abortion, anti-choice use right to life in a intentionally bad way. I'm not
Mhm.
talking about that, but I'm talking about the sense of, do people have, does Bishop have a right to life as an android, or is he not, or does he not? Do the aliens as a living species have a right to life and
Mhm.
just exist as they are? They are not intent, they are the antagonists in this movie because they are the top of the food chain, but they are not, but that's why they're the antagonists. They don't have an agenda
Mhm.
other than trying to eat and survive. So, and it's
And
the humans who come in with the
yeah.
agenda to use them and turn them into a commodity.
Yeah.
And so the question
Which
is
is
like,
like the humans just cannot abide by not being the top of the food chain.
yeah. So then it just kind of, so this franchise, that's the other kind of question I think we'll have to say is, what is this franchise saying about this? In the first movie, the alien was very much meant not to have, there is the morals that people assign to it, but the director also has gone on record saying that the alien is also meant to just be acting out of animalistic instinct and the instinct to survive, and it's these humans that are interfering with it and preventing it from doing that.
Yeah.
And so
Which, like,
any reading
is
of the
legit.
alien as villain is something that we are doing from a human perspective.
Right, because we value humanity and human life more than the aliens' right
Yeah,
to be alive.
yeah,
Which, like, admittedly, the aliens' way of being alive kills humans. So, like,
yep.
there's that, like, there's that aspect of, like,
And the humans it has killed thus
we
far have all invaded its territory. They have all landed on the aliens planet with,
did they in the first movie?
yeah.
I thought there was something, there was like a something that like brought them there.
Yeah, there is a distress call, which we find out in the first movie. The distress call was planted there by the corporation to get people to go there and
Oh,
that's why
I
Ash was
missed
working
that.
doing that all along. That was kind of the deal with Ash. And so they go to the planet. The humans don't know what they're doing, but there's an evil
Yeah, but
intention
they are.
from the corporation using them to
Huh.
go into the alien, find the eggs, and bring it back to the
How
corporation.
does the corporation even know that it exists?
That's
Wow,
the
this is
question. So
like,
we will
yeah.
see if the
Hmm.
franchise answers that, and hint, it does. We'll get there. Um, so yeah, so there's all sorts of complicated things in here. The alien is clearly the antagonist, and also that there's intentional questions about like, is the alien actually bad, or is the alien just neutral, and it's us who invading it, the territory, who are the actual villains in the story,
Hmm. How
or
did
the
the aliens?
corporation being the villain, to be clear,
I mean,
because the
corporation
corporation is
definitely villain.
using the
All
people
corporations
against their
are.
knowledge and will to invade the aliens
All
territory.
corporations are bad.
Yes.
Um, that's fascinating though.
So, oh, and then motherhood is the last kind of religious theme but that'll keep coming back. But just the concept of the alien mother, Ripley
Yeah,
be kind of taking on a mother role here, and also at that deleted scene of her being a mother that we find out
yeah,
later.
and that like is tied up. I don't know if you mentioned grief yet, but like that's also tied up in grief, right? Like the
Yeah,
shifting her grief into care for someone else, which is complicated and understandable kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah. Also, I did not want Vasquez to die, but saw it coming, obviously.
yep.
And I loved when Vasquez and Gorman sacrificed themselves together to keep from feeding the alien side. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. So,
Hmm.
yay, Vasquez and Gorman.
Agreed.
Also, this is, obviously a case of patriarchy
And capitalism.
strikes again.
Yep.
So, again, Ripley is the only competent person here. Um, Also, like the way that she's trying to comfort Newt is like as she's cleaning her face. Hard to believe there's a girl under all this. Pretty one, too. Like, why do you have to comment on that? Where is
Right.
that necessary or appropriate?
Yep.
The answer is nowhere. Unnecessary, inappropriate.
Agreed.
Um, I did get to the point where I was at one point I was like, you know, Hicks is pretty okay. Wow, I've just a fire truck coming.
All good.
Apparently, um, no, but I got to the point where I was like, Hicks is pretty okay because he pays attention and he listens to Ripley and follows her lead instead of like everybody else who's like, psh. Yeah. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, Hicks is pretty okay. Um, and then I think you're the first one that said that the misogyny in the 20 whatevers is, kind of the same as the misogyny of the 19
Yep.
of the of
In
1986.
2300 or whatever year it is. I think
Yeah.
it's 2300 or something like that.
Yeah. Weird how that
Yep.
misogyny
In-
is just
Interesting.
exactly the same. Yeah. And there's a way that they poke fun of at it more, I think. It's maybe more obvious in this one because it really is like all of them are hyped up and then like they all lose. It doesn't save any of them,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
yeah.
Yep. And that also kind of gets to the genre defying aspect again. And I already talked about this, so I won't go into it too much, aside from just the fact that on the sexist side, people have called her Rambess because of her being Rambo, the female version of Rambo. So she's Rambess and she's in space. So that's like a pop culture term for her, which is so sexist. She is her own thing. Do not
Yeah.
call her the female Rambo. And then, but
Also
also,
Rambess is just no.
yeah, right. But
Just no.
also, both actors and directors have cited Ripley, especially in this movie, as a source of inspiration for future action women who are action heroes, such as Buffy Vampire Slayer. Joss Whedon has talked about this movie a lot. Alice in the
Yeah.
Resident Evil series. I know Mila Jovovich has talked about the actor who plays Alice talks about this movie being a source of inspiration for that and stuff. So it's just, I love that this movie kind of has this lasting impact of women can be action heroes too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the lore.
Yeah. I think we'll have to add AI to. We already talked about it, but for future ones, we'll have to add AI to make sure we talk on what movie comments about AI.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll call it a alien
yeah,
lore. Perfect. You can't even tell because capital I's and capital L's in Arial font look the exact same.
there we go.
Oh,
That makes it a
fine.
little bit easier to read.
I guess. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. It's like a hive style kind of thing.
Yeah,
The
and
one
like a
alien just
mother
like
alien,
pumps out all the eggs that just like sit and
kind of
incubate for a while.
graphic too. And
Yeah.
and compared to the first one, like undershowing the alien, this one like goes out of its way to show the queen alien, especially like huge shots
Yeah.
of her throughout the last act of the movie.
She like her like the whatever tube, her fallopian tube or whatever.
Yeah.
Um really I had like visceral memories of those like kind of spring like tubes that we used to play in as a kid where like you could flatten it but then that like bounced out and you could crawl through it and it was just like fabric around wire. That's basically what it is, just more
Yeah.
colorful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, this is the second movie in a row, so I'm gonna go with it that like if you ever find sticky goo, assume that the alien is on board that or inside.
Yep. We'll see if that continues
It's
to play out.
it
I like it.
it's a real clear tell right now.
Yep. 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 So it's the two ways to tell that there's something bad going on in the Alien franchise thus far is A, Ripley warns everybody and she is ignored, and two,
Hmm.
there's sticky goo somewhere. And I
Yeah.
will say, I think we can probably count on both of those continuing for a while
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
franchise.
Oh
Um,
my gosh, we also didn't talk about the fact that Burke, Brick, who?
Burke,
So immemorable.
don't give him a
Um,
non-binary name. He is not Burke.
I know, right? The bee. Um, wants to impregnate Ripley and Newt with the
Uh-huh.
aliens.
Uh-huh.
Which like I do think that this one does a better job of like right to bodily autonomy as like a thing. Both in terms of like that's the thing is like the pushback from Ripley's perspective at least is like no, we have a right to our own bodily autonomy
Hmm.
for her and Newt, but also just in general for all of the humans that like the aliens do not have a right to to use us and kill us in order
Yeah.
to reproduce. And I think right now, particularly where we're at in the state of this
I
country.
I miss that about eight. There's this period of movies in the late from about mid 80s to the early 90s where women in film could talk about abortion and talk about bodily autonomy in a way that it is so taboo to mention in film in general today that it wasn't in the 80s and 90s for some reason. And there, we
Because
also see
Roe v.
pushback to
Wade
that, like
wasn't
in the
controversial when it
um,
passed. Like,
yep.
yeah.
And I mean, we also see kind of the pendulum swinging the other way with that too. If like when we talked about A Nightmare on Elm Street Part Five, The Dream Child, which also came out in this period of 80s and
Mm-hmm.
90s.
Yeah,
But
that's a whole other.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other kind of piece of alien lore I got is that the first movie, Ripley muses that it seems like the Wutani company wants to use it for the military once she finds out that the Wutani is whose corporation is who set them. But this one, it confirms it. That's actually like what the intention was. So
Ugh. Yeah. There's so much good. Like, people say that the defense is like the only reason we have GPS and stuff. And I'm like, okay, but like, we could just pay people to experiment. and
Yeah,
explore, and not have to have one of the options for why they're doing it be to figure out how best to kill people.
right. Like our space program is what gave us certain innovations in pens and stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
also, well, all sorts of innovations, but pens is one of the things we got from the space program. Like, right, we can have inventions in other areas than
Yeah,
military.
we could just budget for
Yeah,
inventions. It'd be great.
agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
So
So
out of
we did kyber crystals last time.
yeah, I want to say I kind of want something different. I'm thinking like we definitely didn't want to do the alien itself or the
Alien
eggs.
eggs.
But could we do like the face hugger? I love the face hugger. It's cute. Or is that still a no? It can be a no. I don't. That's
How
fine.
many? Like, I don't even know how to. Like, it just does not compute that way
Okay, then
as a
then we
rating
won't do that.
for me. I mean, we could do how many Jonesies.
How many Jonesies? Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, because Jonesy knows when the alien is there.
How many alien jazz hands? Since we got that in both the first one and this one.
How many jazz hands? Okay. How many jazz hands?
So, out of either how many xenomorph jazz hands or how many Jonesies you pick, it can be either one. How many would you rate this? And do you have a favorite kill?
Um, my favorite kill is Brick. Obs, the worst. Um, I think I would rate this a 7.5. The military just brings it down a bit. Otherwise, it's like a solid movie.
Yeah.
I was like trying to not just rate everything in the really high up, but I am terrible at
Sometimes they're just really good franchises, but don't worry. Like you have been warned for this franchise. It goes downhill pretty quickly.
yeah. So seven and a
So,
half jazz hands.
I love it.
What
Um,
about you?
I think it'll be the same for me, honestly. 7.5 jazz hands. It's a really fun movie. I do love the moodiness and depth of the first century, and but I also think that this one can be have not much depth at all, just be a fairly straightforward action movie and still be really fun and
Mm-hmm.
get a high rating. And my favorite kill, I think, will be Hudson because he's kind of a jerk. The Bill
Which ones?
Paxton character.
The which one?
Bill Paxton. He was the one that had the bandana on for some scenes. He was like the extra amped up,
Oh, I
chauvinistic
think
dude for a lot
he's
of it.
the one who spit down the hole that had been
Oh,
burned in
probably. Yeah.
alien acid blood. Yeah, I didn't like him either. He was originally going to be um my favorite kill, but then I didn't know who it was. Which jacked up military dude spit down the hole.
I love that you keep calling him Brick, but he's Brick. Um, do you how many
Whatever.
jumps how many jump scares did you have, if any, for this one?
I had 1.5. I had one
Nice.
that was like, I think I had one that was like, if I had been like glued on in, it would have been one, but it wasn't. And then I had a half, and then I had a one that was like, okay, that was a jump scare. So, yeah. What about
Yeah.
you? Did you have any
No,
jump
no
scares?
jump scares. I was also when Emily and I watch the movies together usually, and then I think I said this before too on the podcast, but like I usually try to watch it one time after, and I didn't have time to watch it one time after this time. But the first time I watched it with Emily, I was so stoned that like I barely remember watching it. So most of my notes for this are from having seen it many times. But I have no memory
That
of
actually
watching it
explains a
most
lot.
recently.
Because some of your comments that you put in, I was like, my comments happened before that.
Yeah, I don't
It
quite
makes more
remember the
sense now.
chronology of the movie. Um, yeah, so it's probably been like 3 years since I saw like it where I focused and watched it. Whereas this
Hmm.
one I watched it super stoned, so I just have a little bit of a hit or miss memory of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, So our next movie.
Um, our next movie is Star Wars Episode 6 Return of the Jedi. Dun,
Woo!
dun, 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 dun.
And then in 2 weeks from the day this episode is dropping, we are covering Alien 3 or Alien Cubed,
Alien to the third power.
which
Not
we are
sure how that
watching the
works.
theatrical cut. And do not worry, for those of you who love the assembly cut, we're going to watch that and have that be the Alien episode after that one. But our next one is a theatrical cut of Alien Cubed, and we will have Dr. May Forrest Barnes on to talk about that movie with us.
Yeah. I'm very excited for it. Mm-hmm. And that is it for our show, dear Earthlings, non Earthlings, rocks in space. Voyager 1 is glitching. This is
Oh
how you know
no!
what time it is. Voyager 1 is glitching, sending out a short binary loop. And they're trying to problem solve, but problem solving with a 45-hour delay is a bit tricky.
Yep.
So, shout out to Voyager 1 if you can hear us. We love you. Right in your little spot by the foot of whatever constellation you're by.
I love V'ger too, for you Star Trek fans. Oh, minus spoilers. You'll forget by the time I watch Star Wars, though. So.
Absolutely, I will. Our theme music was by Matt May. Horror Nerds at Church releases seasonally on Thursdays. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us on Patreon and get access to exclusive movie commentary episodes, BooTube episodes, and more bonus content by going to patreon.com/horror nerds at church. Starting at only $5 to sign up, it is cheaper than Ripley or Newt's therapy bills. Follow us on
True.
social media, Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church, and Blue Sky on Twitter at HNACPOD for all the latest updates about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time, never trust the corporations.
I love it.
I forgot that I had that part.